Freddie Mercury found the song in a piano he bought, and it became a hit. London in the mid-1970s breathed an atmosphere that seemed woven from contrasts. Rain-soaked streets, shrouded in gray fog, stood side by side with bright shop windows, where the spirits of rock and roll and the new wave lingered. Freddie Mercury, dressed in a brown leather jacket with fringe, rustling wine-colored trousers, and thick-framed sunglasses, wandered through the labyrinthine alleys of Portobello Road Market, as though searching for something greater than just another antique lot. His curly hair, slightly tousled by the wind, revealed a man who didn't seek to hide from attention, yet today he was alone, without the entourage of managers, without the fans who usually surrounded him like a flock of hungry crows. This was his personal ritual. From time to time, he would retreat into these London backstreets to remind himself that beyond the stage, behind the curtains of fame, existed a world full of untold stories. A world where every object, every scratch on the surface of an old dresser or cracked leather on a chair, carried the breath of time. Freddie always believed that things possessed a soul, and today, as always, he was walking toward that belief. The market buzzed with life. Vendors shouted prices for vintage records, worn books, and antique clocks. Tourists snapped photos, while locals in tattered clothes exchanged gossip at fruit stalls. Freddie, accustomed to the roar of concert halls, found a strange peace in this chaos. He stopped at every stall, as if exploring another person's life through its fragments. His gaze caught details: a crack on a porcelain cup, traces of wax on an old seal, a tarnished gold chain coiled in a box like a snake. He didn't buy much. His collection at the house on Gloucester View was already overflowing. But today something was supposed to happen. Today he felt it in his skin, like the premonition of a note before it turns into a melody. It was precisely at the edge of the market, where the stalls grew less vibrant and the vendors more sullen, that his attention was caught by the figure of an old man sitting on an overturned crate. Before him, under a tattered canvas awning, stood a piano. Not the gleaming instrument one might see on the stage of the Royal Albert Hall, but a worn one covered in scratches and stains of time. Its black lacquer had dulled, the keys yellowed in places, and the wooden frame was adorned with carvings that seemed to have been rubbed by a nervous hand for centuries. Freddie approached closer, and at that moment his heart, usually beating so confidently to the rhythm of Bohemian Rhapsody, slowed its pace. He recognized this type of piano. Broadwood, a British master whose instruments were renowned as far back as the 19th century. But this one was special. In it, one could sense weariness, yet not weakness, as if it had weathered storms but still remembered how to sing. "How much?" Freddie asked, not taking his eyes off the instrument. His voice, usually so powerful on stage, was softer now, almost a whisper. The old man lifted his head. His face was etched with wrinkles like a map of ancient roads, and his eyes, clouded by cataracts, barely made out the buyer's silhouette. £40, he grumbled, and don't ask for a discount. I'm already selling it cheap. Freddie smiled. He knew that £40 was a ridiculous price for such an instrument, even in this condition. A Broadwood from the 1940s, if restored, could cost 10 times more. But the old man clearly didn't know this. Perhaps he simply wanted to get rid of the cumbersome thing that had been gathering dust in his basement for years. Freddie didn't haggle. He handed over the money, and within an hour the piano, wrapped in canvas and tied to a truck, was on its way to his home on Gloucester View. Freddie's house on Gloucester View was more than just a residence. It was a museum of his soul. In the living room stood statues from different eras. The walls were adorned with paintings in gilded frames, and in the corner stood an antique globe, where the borders of countries looked as they had before the First World War. But above all, Freddie loved his study, the room where he composed music. There already stood a Steinway, a gift from the label after the success of A Night at the Opera. But the new piano he decided to place in the living room. It deserves to be under the light, Freddie thought as he watched the workers carefully carry the instrument through the door. When the last echoes of the departing truck faded, Freddie was left alone with the piano. He ran his palm over its lid, feeling every unevenness, every scratch, as if reading a story written by time itself. He opened the keyboard. The keys under his fingers were firm but not broken. He pressed C major. The sound came out muffled yet clear, like the voice of an old friend who had long been silent. "You've survived something," he whispered, and at that moment, a melody surfaced in his mind, one he had never heard before, a short phrase like a fragment of someone's song stuck in memory. He closed his eyes, trying to catch it again, but it slipped away, leaving only a warm sensation in his chest. The next morning, Freddie called a tuner. Mr. Hargreaves, a man with gray mustaches and hands scored by strings, arrived promptly at 10. He examined the piano with professional calm, but Freddie noticed how his eyes lit up when he saw the instrument's interior. "Broadwood, 1943, Hargreaves mumbled, "a rare specimen. They hardly produced any during the war. It's strange it's still in such condition." "Why?" Freddie asked, sitting on the nearby sofa. "The bombing, sir. In 1940, Broadwood's London workshops suffered from air raids. Many instruments were destroyed. Whoever preserved this one must have loved it deeply." Freddie nodded, but his thoughts were already racing ahead. He watched as Hargreaves worked, his fingers deftly turning tuning pins, checking string tension, adjusting wooden parts. An hour later, the tuner straightened up. "Almost ready, but there's something strange." He pointed to an inner panel of the piano, near the bass strings. "Here it seems there's a hidden compartment. I've seen this in old instruments. Sometimes musicians hid personal items there." Freddie moved closer. Hargreaves carefully opened a small panel, and inside, wrapped in yellow fabric, lay an envelope. Freddie's heart began to beat faster. He took it in his hands. The envelope was old, the paper fragile as parchment, and the handwriting on it, neat yet faded. There was no address on the envelope, only a single name: Alice. "Would you like me to leave you alone?" Hargreaves asked, sensing he had stumbled upon someone else's story. Freddie nodded, and when the door closed behind the tuner, he gently unfolded the envelope. Inside was a letter written in blue ink. The date in the corner read, October 15, 1940. The words trembled as if written in haste or fear. "My dearest Thomas, if you are reading this, it means I did not return. The bombings have started again tonight, and I am not sure I will be able to sit at the piano tomorrow. But I promised you I would keep playing until you return from the front. I play every night in the shelter at Aldwych Station. People say the music keeps them alive, but I play for you. You said my piano is our home, and I believe that even if I leave, it will remain. Find it if you can. It's in the basement, behind the old curtain. I hid this letter inside so you would know. I loved you until the very end. Yours, Alice." Freddie read the letter 3 times. His fingers trembled. He pictured her, a young woman in 1940s clothing, sitting at this very piano in a dark basement, playing for people terrified by every explosion. He pictured Thomas, a soldier who perhaps never returned to find this letter. And the piano? The piano had survived. It had endured the war, the bombings, years of oblivion, only to end up here, in the hands of a man who also knew that music was more than just sound. Freddie approached the piano and ran his hand over its inner panel. "Basement, behind the old curtain," he repeated to himself. Where was that basement now? Who was Alice? And what had happened to Thomas? He had never been a man to leave questions unanswered. His love for artifacts had always been tied to the desire to understand those who created them, those who preserved them. Now he felt he had to uncover Alice's story. This wasn't mere curiosity. It was a commitment to a person who might have died in the darkness, leaving behind only a letter and a piano. First, he headed to the British Library. He knew it housed archives of London newspapers, including those published during the Blitz. A young librarian wearing glasses looked at him in surprise when he gave his name, but Freddie asked her not to draw attention. He sat at a table in the reading room and began flipping through microfiche copies of newspapers from 1940 to 1941. His eyes skimmed over announcements of bombings, lists of the deceased, and notes about concerts and shelters. And there, in an issue of the Evening Standard from November 1940, he found what he was looking for. Young pianist Alice Morgan continues to give concerts in the shelter at Aldwych Station despite intensified air raids. Her playing, witnesses say, brings comfort to hundreds of people seeking refuge from bombs. Miss Morgan, a student of the Royal Academy of Music, refused to leave London to stay with those in need. Freddie exhaled. Alice Morgan, a student of the Royal Academy. He kept digging. In the next note, dated January 1941, it read, "Unfortunately, pianist Alice Morgan perished in the night raid on Covent Garden. Her piano, damaged by debris, was found among the ruins of the basement. Details of the investigation are pending." Freddie's heart tightened, so she had died. But how had the piano survived intact? He returned to the letter. "I hid this letter inside so you would know. I loved you until the very end." Perhaps Thomas never found it. Perhaps the piano was taken from the rubble and sold to someone who didn't know its history. The next day, Freddie went to Covent Garden. The streets where Alice's house once stood were now lined with modern buildings, but he found the old library where, he hoped, district archives were preserved. There he met Mrs. Ellen Thompson, a former librarian who had worked there since the 1940s. She was over 90, but her memory remained sharp. "Alice Morgan," she repeated when Freddie showed her the newspaper clipping. "Yes, I remembered her. Such a quiet girl, but when she sat at the piano, the whole world fell silent. She played Chopin, Beethoven. Even on those terrible nights when bombs fell nearby, she never stopped. They said she had a sweetheart at the front, but he never returned. After her death, the piano was taken by some workers. They said it miraculously survived under the rubble. It's a shame it ended up on the dump." "Do you know what happened to Thomas?" Freddie asked. Mrs. Thompson shook her head. No one knew his last name. Alice only called him Thomas. Perhaps he died in battle. Or maybe he searched for her but didn't make it. Freddie thanked her and stepped outside. The air smelled of rain, and he felt the weight of history settle on his shoulders. He pictured Alice sitting in a dark basement, playing for people trembling with fear. He pictured her writing this letter, knowing she might not live to see tomorrow. And he understood why. The piano had caught his attention at that market. It wasn't just an instrument. It was a voice from the past waiting to be heard. Returning home, Freddie sat at the piano. He closed his eyes and began to play. Not the melody he had first heard, but something new, slow, and sorrowful. Each note seemed like a word from Alice's letter. He played for hours until his fingers went numb, until the room filled. The following week, Freddie hired a historian specializing in World War II to learn more about Thomas. After months of searching, they found his last name in Army archives. Thomas Harper, an infantry private, declared missing in action in 1942 in Africa. His body was never found. Freddie ordered a small memorial plaque and placed it next to the piano. It read, "Alice and Thomas. Their music lives on." From then on, the piano became the centerpiece of Freddie's home. He played it every day, sometimes aimlessly, as if continuing a dialogue with Alice. Sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he felt as though he could hear her fingers moving alongside his own. He never spoke publicly about this, but once, during a 1978 interview, he was asked what inspired his music. Freddie smiled and said, "Sometimes it's voices from the past. Sometimes it's people we'll never meet, but who left something important behind. I believe music is a letter we write to each other through time." When Freddie died in 1991, the piano remained in his home. His heirs decided to donate it to the Queen Museum in London, but with one condition: it would never be restored. They wanted the scratches, stains, and marks of time to remain in place as a reminder that every object has its own story. Today, if you visit the museum, you'll see the piano under a glass dome. Next to it stands a small plaque that reads, "Broadwood 1943. Belonged to pianist Alice Morgan. Saved from the ruins of Covent Garden. Became part of Queen's legend." But those who know the story say that at night, when the museum is closed, the piano sometimes emits soft sounds. As if two voices, one from the 1940s, another from the 1970s, continue to play together, reminding the world that love and music are stronger than time. Freddie wasn't a man to stop halfway. Having received the letter, he immersed himself in Alice's past with the same passion he put into creating music. The morning after visiting the library, he went to the archives of the Royal Academy of Music, located in South Kensington. The building, with its red brick and carved columns, held the spirit of an era when musical education was a privilege of the chosen few. Freddie, dressed in his usual attire, a fringed silk shirt and tight-fitting trousers, felt out of place among the stern professors and students in dark suits. But his name, spoken by the secretary, instantly opened the archive doors. "Mr. Mercury, we've heard of your interest in Alice Morgan," said the archivist, an elderly woman with gold-rimmed glasses. "Unfortunately, many records from the war years are lost. But I found something." She handed him a worn folder. Inside were photographs splattered with ink stains and faded documents. One photo showed a young woman in a strict dress sitting at a piano. Her face was gentle, but determination shone in her eyes. The caption read, "Alice Morgan, 1939, winner of the Chopin Prize." Freddie traced the edge of the photograph with his finger. This was her, the very girl whose letter he held in his hands. "She was talented," the archivist continued, "but the war changed everything. Many students left for the front or hospitals. Alice stayed to play for people in shelters. They say she refused to leave London even after her house was bombed." "Her house?" Freddie asked. "Yes. She lived in Covent Garden in a small apartment above the shop. After the raid, almost nothing remained. But the piano." The archivist hesitated. "The piano was found in the basement, behind the curtain," as she wrote. "They brought it here, but no one knew who it belonged to. Later, it was probably sold." Freddie thanked her and stepped outside. The air was saturated with the scent of old books and rain. He decided to go to Covent Garden to see the place where Alice lived. On the way, he stopped at an antique map shop and bought a 1940s map of London. On the map, he found the street where Alice is. Disappointed, Freddie headed to Aldwych Station, where, according to the newspapers, Alice had given concerts. The station had been closed to passengers since 1994. But in the 1940s, it served as a shelter for Londoners. Freddie found the entrance overgrown with grass and descended. The tunnels, covered in dust and cobwebs, held traces of the past, wartime graffiti, fragments of posters urging "stay alert." He pictured Alice sitting here in the dark, playing for hundreds of people, trembling at every explosion. How her delicate, precise fingers drew melodies that gave hope. On his way back, Freddie stopped by a veterans organization in Islington. There, he hoped to find someone who remembered Alice. In the building, furnished with old armchairs and photographs of soldiers, he met Sir John Wilcox, a former pilot nearing 100 years old. Upon hearing Alice Morgan's name, the old man came alive. "Oh yes," he exclaimed, his voice trembling with memories. "She played in the shelter at Aldwych every night. Even when bombs fell nearby, she never stopped. I remember once she played Debussy's Clair de Lune. Everyone fell silent. Even the children stopped crying. She was an angel." "Do you know what happened to her?" Freddie asked. "Her house was bombed in January 1941. She died under the rubble. But the piano?" Sir John shook his head. "I heard it was saved. Someone from the workers pulled it from the debris. Too bad I don't know where it went." Freddie returned home with new details, but the puzzle still wasn't complete. He realized he needed more information about the piano. The next morning, he contacted the Museum of Musical Instruments in Edinburgh, which held Broadwood archives. There he received a copy of a document confirming that the piano with the serial number matching his instrument was sold in 1943 to a private individual in London. The buyer was listed as Mr. George Morgan, Alice's father. This was the beginning. Freddie found George Morgan's address in old telephone directories. It turned out that after Alice's death, her father had moved to the London suburbs to Hampstead. Freddie went there, hoping to find someone from the family. In Hampstead, he discovered a small house surrounded by a garden. The door was opened by an elderly woman, Mrs. Evelyn Morgan, Alice's cousin. "Alice," she whispered upon hearing the name. "Poor girl. She was so kind, so talented. Her father didn't survive her death. He died a year after her. And the piano? Mrs. Morgan sighed. After the bombing, it was taken by workers. Father tried to find it but failed. Then he sold everything that remained and moved away. Do you know what happened to Thomas? Freddie asked. Thomas Harper? Mrs. Morgan frowned. Yes, he was her sweetheart. They met at the academy. He left for the front in 1940. After Alice's death, he came here looking for her. But the piano was already gone. Then he went missing in action. They say he died in Africa. Freddie felt a lump rise in his throat. Now he knew almost everything. All that remained was to understand how the piano had ended up at the flea market. Returning home, he sat at the instrument again. His fingers touched the keys, and he began to play the melody that had come to him the first day. Now he knew it wasn't just improvisation. It was Alice's song, the one she played in the shelter to give people hope. Months passed. Freddie couldn't forget Alice's story. He began incorporating elements of her melodies into his compositions. One day, during the recording of the News of the World album, he suggested Brian may play acoustic guitar in a style reminiscent of a classical pianist. Brian, surprised, asked what had inspired him. It's the story of a girl, Freddie replied, who played for people in the dark. Her name was Alice. Brian nodded, asking no further questions. He knew Freddie had his secrets and respected them. The result was the composition Love of My Life, where the piano part recorded on that very instrument sounded like a message from the past. But Freddie wanted more. He decided to create a project dedicated to Alice and all those who, like her, found the strength to create in the darkest times. With the help of Queen's manager John Reed, he organized a charity concert to benefit a fund aiding musicians in crisis situations. The concert took place at the Royal Albert Hall in 1977. Before the performance, Freddie told Alice Morgan's story. The hall fell silent. When he finished, the audience gave a standing ovation. And in the middle of the performance, during Bohemian Rhapsody, Freddie suddenly stepped away from the microphone and sat at the piano. He played the short melody he had heard that first day. It was Alice's music. After the concert, an old man approached Freddie, trembling with emotion. I was in the shelter at Aldwych, he whispered. I heard her play. You brought her music back. Freddie embraced him. At that moment, he knew he had made the right choice. Alice's music lived on. Over the years, the piano became an inseparable part of Freddie's life. He played it every day, even when exhausted from tours. Sometimes, in the silence of the night, he heard the instrument emit soft sounds, as if someone invisible was touching the keys. He wasn't afraid. On the contrary, he felt Alice was near. Once, in 1984, Freddie invited Roger Taylor to his home. They sat in the living room, drank wine, and discussed a new album. Roger noticed the piano. Do you play it often? He asked. Yes, Freddie replied. It's not just an instrument. It's a story. He told Roger about the letter, about Alice, about Thomas. Roger listened in silence, his face a mix of admiration and sadness. You know, he said afterward, that's the most beautiful story I've ever heard. From then on, the piano became a legend among Queen members. Brian May once admitted that while recording The Show Must Go On, he thought of Freddie and Alice. We all play for those who can't, he said. When Freddie died in 1991, the piano remained in his home. His heirs, knowing the story, decided to donate it to the Queen Museum in London. But before that, they held a small ceremony. At the house gathered Freddie's close friends, Queen members, and even Mrs. Evelyn Morgan, who had come from Hampstead. She approached the piano and placed her hand on its lid. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for reminding us of her. Today, the piano stands in the museum under a glass dome. Next to it is a photograph of Alice, the letter, and a small note from Freddie. Alice, your music lives on. Thank you for the inspiration, Freddie. But those who know the story say that at night, when the museum is closed, the piano sometimes emits soft sounds, as if two voices, one from the 1940s, another from the 1970s, continue to play together, reminding the world that love and music are stronger than time. Freddie was never a man who feared death. His creativity was always imbued with a search for meaning, a connection between past and future. Alice's piano became for him not just an artifact, but a living bridge between eras. Every time he sat at the keys, he felt how her story intertwined with his own. He knew music wasn't just sound. It was memory that didn't die. Once, during a tour in Japan, he was asked what the piano meant to him. Freddie smiled and replied, "It's a voice from the past that reminds us that even in the darkest times, there's room for beauty." It was precisely this philosophy that permeated his music. In Queen songs, there was always something eternal, something that transcended time. When the Queen Museum opened in 1997, the piano took center stage in the exhibition. Visitors approached it, read the story, and reflected. Many left flowers, as if before them stood not just an instrument, but a sanctuary. One visitor, a young pianist from London, wrote in the guest book, "I played this piano as a child. My grandfather was one of the workers who saved it from the rubble. He said it once had a soul. Now I understand what he meant." This note is still kept in the museum. It reminds us that stories like music have a way of returning. They find those ready to listen. Freddie Mercury left this world, but his connection to Alice's piano remained. Today, decades later, people still come to the museum to touch this story. They listen to recordings where the piano part of Love of My Life plays, and they feel how two times merge into one. Perhaps this is the true magic of music. It doesn't belong to anyone in particular. It passes from hand to hand, generation to generation, as long as someone is ready to listen. And when the museum sinks into silence at night, the piano sometimes emits soft sounds. Not loudly, not enough to wake the guard. Just a note here, a pause there, as if two singers, one from the past, one from the present, sing a duet for those who believe music is eternal.